Hi, it's Chris Titley here from Scoreboard, and today we're doing something a little different. We're partnering with the Vitalis Institute to have a chat about some of the areas of high performance when it comes to sport. So today we're joined by Stuart Smith, one of the co-founders of the Vitalis Institute, to talk about everything behind the scenes, behind the curtain of high-performing sport, and some examples that he has seen in his life, and also a general conversation. We're going to trial this as a bit of a mini-series. We're going to do a couple of episodes with the Vitalis Institute and Scoreboard in partnership together to unpack and to sort of learn from some of the podcasts, A, that we've done before, and B, also to learn from Stuart and his team around what they're doing at the Vitalis Institute. I hope you enjoy this little side series, mini-series. It's an experiment we're doing, but that's okay, and we love doing experiments to learn. And I'm sure you'll find this episode very insightful as we go through some stories. So let's get to it. The first episode with the Scoreboard and Vitalis Institute partnership with Stuart Smith. And we're deep diving today with Stuart Smith, who's joined us in the studio here on the Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th of March, but that's a bad omen to start with, at midday today. And before we get into Stuart's life, I'm curious, Stuart, how's your 2026 started?
Hi, Chris. Look, thank you very much for having me. Yes, in answer to your question, it's been a great start of the year. We've had a really good start, personally, professionally, on all fronts. It's been a very good start, probably one of the best starts I can remember, actually.
And you are the co-founder of Vitalis. So I'm curious to know, firstly, a little bit about that, and then a little bit about you and your involvement in sport.
Sure. So, I mean, it's like most people, it's probably a fairly convoluted story. So I was born and raised in Brisbane and always loved the Aussie lifestyle and always loved everything about Southeast Queensland. And sport was always a massive part of my life. So after school, I studied a master's or an undergraduate in sports science. Then I did a master's in sports science. And I was working with Australian-based athletes here in Brisbane and doing a lot of stuff particularly with rowers and swimmers, trying to get them onto Australian teams, but all within the strength and conditioning field. From that point, I was loving what I was doing, but I had this yearning to want to travel. I wanted to travel and to see, particularly Europe. America never really interested me, but it was always Europe, and it was always the different cultures and languages, etc. I hadn't had the chance to do that. So I moved. One day I had booked a one-way ticket to London, and when I arrived in London, I had a few relatives, so I stayed on their couch for a couple of weeks, and was lucky to get offered a couple of jobs. And the one that I took, which was in a way life-changing for me, was working as a performance coach for some of the best young talent in motorsport. And the idea was that the big teams in Formula One would go and scout the young talent all across Europe and all across the world, and they get the fastest guys, and they would put them into programs, not only to try and develop their driving skills, but also their human performance skills. So from that point, I then went into within this what's called a performance coach, so looking at all areas of human performance. And all the guys who I worked with there went to have very successful Formula One careers. And the main one was Daniel Ricciardo. So he was the first to graduate to Formula One, so to speak. And he asked me to go with me full time on that journey with him. So I was with him full time from essentially the middle of 2010 till the end of 2015.
The whole thing? Yeah. And one of my values is prosperity. It must have been wonderful to see some of these drivers that you were looking after prosper into fame and fortune and all those things that come with it. I'm curious as to know some of the learnings from that and some of the traits that they had.
Yeah, it's a very good question. And one of the things that I noticed was that the jump is very quick. It's a very, very quick transition from you're trying to become a paid driver, or you're a sponsored driver, so to speak, to now you're commanding millions of dollars a year. And in some cases, towards the back end of Daniel's career, it was commanding really, really big money. And I think one of the things that it was most important that I really recognised in that journey was that he had to have a really good group of people around him. He had to be really, really clear with his values. He had to be really clear with his ego management and various other things to make sure that he didn't get caught up in that wave of the fame and the fortune. And as you can imagine, you see this countless times over and over again where you've got individuals go from, let's call it, a lack of prosperity or a lack of abundance to now you've got the fame, you've got the fortune, you've got the parties, you've got the girls, you've got all all of it that comes with that, and everyone wanting to be associated with you too. And it's so important. What I found was it was so important that he had those good people around him who were not influenced by that, who were still the same people, and that what I call his North Star was very, very clear to him. So his values, his identity, his ego was in check, et cetera, et cetera. And without that, you can get lost. You can get incredibly lost because, as you alluded to, you go from nothing to suddenly you've got this overwhelming abundance of money and people wanting to spend time with you, et cetera. So that was a really, really important lesson.
I'm also curious around the fact that inner circle, that team around him, as an example, I'm not picking on Daniel Ricciardo, but just broadly speaking, do they talk Formula One?
Yeah, absolutely, because it can become so all-consuming. So because their life is so dictated by a large part the output in Formula One, the outcomes. So a lot of the time, I think one of the strengths we had within that environment was that I personally was never a motorsport fan prior to going into the sport, so I was never interested in motorsport. Like I'd watched a couple of Aussie Grand Prix and a couple of the opening laps in the Aussie Grand Prix here prior to moving to Europe, but it was never on my radar. I'd always loved the non-motorised sport. So I was always very, very big on let's leave motorsport at the track. Let's leave the contract negotiations at the track. Let's leave the analysis of the data and everything else that's at the track. And from that point, if you want to talk about it outside of it, it has to be in a very, very concrete block of time, and it's got to be very, very conscious as opposed to these flippant conversations. So yeah, it was always, I think it was always a strength of the people around him was that they weren't, let's call it motorheads or rev heads. And
to be the peak performance at a particular moment in time or consistent performance, some traits and some I suppose in the world that you live in, some things that people do a little bit differently to others and why they're successful versus others that may not be as successful.
Look, it was a fascinating period working with Daniel, and it was just such an eye-opener because I was at the coalface and I had time to observe him in that environment and observe what he was like before practice sessions and before qualifying, before races, because I was the one who was warming him up and was with him and spent a lot of time with him. And in his situation, his ability to be able to control his emotions was one of the things that was almost a superpower. I consider it a superpower. Like he would be able to, before a qualifying session, he would be able to control his emotions and get into exactly the state that he needed to do from a mood profiling perspective, and to be able to hold that throughout the qualifying and throughout the races and et cetera, et cetera. And this was despite global media being constantly around his car, particularly when he was in Red Bull and when he was fighting for pole position. So his ability to be able to control his emotions was unbelievable. So I think that in answer to your question, what are some of the things that those really top performers do? It's the ability to be able to know where they need to get to from a mood profiling perspective and know how to control their emotions and to self-regulate and to do it in all different environments.
You just touched on mood profiling, something which I am not familiar with and maybe some listeners aren't familiar with. Could you want to describe what that is? And I suppose you mentioned the superpower of Daniel, but describing what that is in terms of how he gets to that particular mood.
Yeah. So there's probably a little bit of context there. So just for a little bit of context, around about 2012, so the second year of Formula One, I really started noticing that he was able to do things in a car that were unbelievable when his headspace was right. So when he had really good clarity, when he was in control of his emotions and when he knew what he needed to do at any given point in time on the weekend. So once his headspace was good, it was like he would do things where you think, where did that come from? And the contrary was also true. When his headspace wasn't good, he was in a place where he wasn't getting the most out of the car, and you could really see it. And like I said, I had this very privileged position of having the ability to observe this firsthand in real time in the environment. So what we started doing was we started looking at or started delving into what helped him with that headspace, what helped him to get into that headspace. And we started talking about it before weekends, and what we would do is we'd sit down with a big A3 piece of paper before a weekend and we'd go through anything that may be in his headspace. And we'd start to then try and clear those blocks such that when the weekend came, his headspace was as good as it possibly could be. that then led me to study a Masters of Psychology and then work full-time with different athletes and different executives. But the mood profiling, so where the mood profiling came from was essentially from some of those conversations. So we would say, okay, when do you perform best? Like, what headspace do you need to be in? What level of arousal do you need to be in to be able to perform your best? And is that different between qualifying and races? So the races, obviously, it's a lot of overtaking, defensive driving, trying to understand when there is a gap for you to be able to actually make a pass, and when you have to really defend hard, and et cetera, et cetera. So there was always this need to, on a Sunday, for him to be a little bit more aroused, so to speak. So a little bit more up and about is what the footy term would be. And on the Saturday, it was still not as aroused in that place. So essentially what we're talking about is, when do you perform best? So some people perform best when they are at a mood profile of, say, a 9 out of 10, when they're really ready to go and they're really, like, you can see a lot of the rugby players and a lot of the contact sport guys often have to get into that place. Some people prefer to be calm. Some people prefer to be in a situation where they're calmer, and that gives them clarity. So for us, it was about understanding, okay, what is it? What place do you need to get to from a mood profiling perspective and an arousal perspective? So the lower on the mood profiling spectrum you're talking about, the more relaxed you are. So let's try and put it in layman's terms. It's like a 1 out of 10. You're sitting on the couch on a Sunday afternoon watching TV, and a 10 out of 10 is just before you're about to have a fight with someone.
And then the inputs must be quite variable in terms of the number of inputs and the main inputs into getting someone to that key moment of their mood profile and ready to perform. Let's touch on a couple of them, which may impact coming to, in my head, don't know if this is true or not, but sleep would be one of them, nutrition, mindset, partner relationships, a whole lot of different mental strength, etc. Am I on the money there somewhat with some of the inputs?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of those things you've talked about are some of those really foundational areas that help you to get a good headspace in general in life. Like, they were your non-negotiables to get a really good headspace. And as we know, and there's more and more information, thankfully, coming out about just how important that is to be able to have that headspace in general life. But if you're talking about a mood profiling in the moment for a specific period of time, let's call it 45 minutes to an hour, or a footy game, or a sporting event, or a concert, or whatever it may be, it's more along the lines of, how do you prepare in the half an hour before? What are you doing? What music are you listening to? How much caffeine have you had? What are the things that you're reflecting on in terms of why you want to be performing in this event, or why you're doing that particular event? So, for example, if we talk about a different sport, if you look at the Origin last year, it always really interests me to see people. There's a couple of individuals, I think it was Nathan Clear in the New South Wales team. You see him writing or reading his diary before he's going out to, this was half an hour before play, and he's reflecting on what are the key things that he probably wants to get out of the game, but also probably why he wants to do it, why footy is important to him, and why he's going to push through certain pain barriers, etc. So then how do you then manipulate, how do you get into that mood? So it is, like I said, caffeine, music, why you're doing it, talking with those people around you in terms of, and then helping them to get you into that place as well.
And do people understand how important that 30 to 45 minutes is before, or not really?
I'm not sure. I work not full-time in sport now, but I have a lot of clients across many different sports within sport, and I do have other business clients. But there was a fascinating, one of the experiences I had in Formula One was at a Grand Prix, a European Grand Prix in 2015. And as you can imagine, Formula One is what we call a travelling circus. You travel around the world and you get to know people from all the different teams and all the different broadcasters and drivers. And there was a lot of ex-drivers who went to be commentators. And we're on the grid, and this ex-driver came up to me and said, geez, Daniel looks like he's in a really good spot. Like, he looks like he's really ready to go. And I said, yeah, absolutely. Like, he's really dialed in and he's in a really great place. And he was referencing his mood profiling. He was referencing the fact that he had that look in his eye and he was really focused. And at the time, Daniel was doing an interview or talking with his engineer. And so we all just stood side by side. And I said to him, out of interest, when did you perform best, like in your Formula One career? Was it when you were relaxed, like more relaxed, or was it when you had to be up and about? And he said, oh, I've never thought about that. I've never actually gone through and thought about that. And this guy had an incredibly successful Formula One career, like a really success. He never got to the top. But it was a fascinating insight to me in terms of you've spent upwards of 10 plus years driving at the very, very top level against the best guys. And you've never considered it. You've never considered, when do I perform best? And there's a huge difference, because with the athletes I work with, we see there's a massive difference that if they need to get up and about, when they get up and about, their performances start to improve significantly. Whereas if they don't, they lose that ability, and vice versa is also true. If they need to be calm, they need to know how to control those emotions and to be able to regulate accordingly. But so in answer to your question, I'm not sure how many professional sports people have delved into this, but it's a big part of what I think contributes to success within that environment.
And how do you, and I've asked this a couple of times on the podcast, how do you, I suppose, the grey area between superstition and structure?
I think you've got to have the way I approach it is you've got to have a flexible structure. So a lot of the time, if you go into a situation where everything has to be perfect, I think you're setting yourself up for too much rigidity, because often it's not always going to be that you're able to follow that perfect routine. There might be something that comes in and affects that routine. And we see the benefit or the parallels between business and sport in this example. And I'll use a business example. Some of my work is working with hedge fund traders. And one of the guys who I'm working with who's based in the UK, fascinating guy. But when we started working together, he was referencing a story or referencing some of his actions, which were when he made money on a given day, the next day he would wear a certain coloured shirt, and when he lost money on a certain day, he would wear another coloured shirt. So he always cycled between these two different shirts. And when we started talking about it, I said, do you really think that's having an impact on your performance? Like, do you really, really believe that? And he said, no, you're probably not. So he stopped it there and then. So he was able to stop that superstition there and then. So often it's a case of really saying, hey, do you really believe that if you put your undies on before your socks, or vice versa, or whatever it may be, that's really going to have an impact on your performance? And often it's, no, not really. And then people can move past that a lot of the time. But as long as you've got those controlled, you have your routine, you know what you need to do to be able to prepare for your game. But as long as it's there's a flexibility to that.
And what about when circumstances get thrown a curveball during it, and then the excuses start to happen? Like, let's say you're into your flow state and you're right, ready to go, and then all of a sudden it buckets down raining, and something becomes a little bit left field, or a call goes against your way that interrupts your kind of flow, and then you may not get the result.
We talk a lot about the ability to be in the moment, and to be in the moment at all given times, and the ability to be able to come back to just now. And you can imagine the different sports where this is incredibly relevant. And some come to mind. If you're a batter in cricket, the ability or the necessity to come back to just now, because you're going to play and miss, and you're going to get out, and there's going to be tough times. Or if you're a golfer, you're not going to hit everyone flush, and there's going to be ones where you're going to shank and you're going to hook. Or if you're a tennis player, same deal. Like, they're having to do this multiple times throughout a tennis match. So it's a skill to be able to then come back into the moment. So how do you get back into the moment? You train it. You go through different things to be able to help that. And that's one of the preconditions for flow, is the ability to be in the moment.
And then from a competitive point of view, are these people that you have dealt with in your world, in a scale of 1 to 10 of competitiveness, are they at 15?
Yeah, a lot of them are. Yeah, very much so. So we've played, it was always a funny one for me, because it was always, when you play like a table tennis or a snooker or whatever it may be, it's always sheep. You're playing for sheep stations with a lot of them. It really is that way.
There was The Last Dance with the security guards, I think it was, and Michael Jordan was playing something with the security guards as he was going out, and then he was like, he got beaten. He's like, no, we're going to continue to play until they win. And then from obviously, as you mentioned as an example, Daniel Ricciardo, in terms of it must be difficult from an ego point of view when you realise that you're actually very good at something, and how do you control that ego, maybe off the field or off the track or whatever it might be, where maybe you've hit the best in the world, or maybe you're nearing the best in the world, and almost maybe potentially stop listening to other people or coaches, etc.
In terms of how do you manage that?
Yeah, how do you manage that, and have you seen things maybe not under your wing, but other things that go wrong where the chest goes up a bit and then the performance starts to come off?
Yeah, absolutely. We always like to do things where it was you'd be humbled. So do activities where it was a case of, hey, you're a great, as an example, you're a great driver, but let's now go and do a 2 to 3K time trial and see how you go against some of these guys, and you get into some other runners, and it would be how you've been humbled. Interestingly, I talk to some of the traders about that who I work with as well, because some of the traders, when they start to really get ahead of themselves in terms of they're making money, more and more money, it's like you need to be humbled now, because that's when you can start to get to the stage where you get ahead of yourself. So that was one of the ways that we would do it, but we'd always come back to really making sure that he had a really, really clear set of values that were really important to him, and that he was living by those values. That was really important. And also that his identity wasn't too closely linked to him being a Formula One driver, or to any sports person being I am a Queensland Origin player, or I am a player for Carlton in the AFL, whatever it may be. So it's like we're trying to dissociate the identity of who they are as a person from what they do and how much money they may have. So we then would start to delve into things like, well, talk to me about your good traits and your bad traits. Talk to me about what are some of the things that you like to do. Who are the people you like to spend time with? Why? And then you start to get an idea about, well, that's who you are as a person, as opposed to I'm a Formula One driver with X number of $1 million in the bank. And once you can start to understand that, you can start to, I referenced that North Star earlier, you start to get that North Star, and that helps to be able to navigate that world of excess.
But the focus on, let's say, a Formula One driver and the desire, and I've heard a little bit about Ash Barty and a few people, like the desire to get to where you want to get to. What's the drive? Is it personally driven? Is it awards? Is it acclaim? Is it fame? Is it money? Like, I'm curious. I've done 160 episodes of these interviews, and everyone's got a bit of a different reason. But broadly speaking, I'm curious as to, like, what is it? What's the drive? And is there a chip on the shoulder somewhere?
My thoughts and my experiences, and this is speaking from experience, is that this may sound funny to people, it may resonate with some people, but for me, they're often looking for love and validation from their parents. That's where it starts. And so it starts early. So for example, I saw if in Formula One there was, and this also may be fascinating to some people or may be a shock to some people, but some of the Formula One drivers hate Formula One. They really don't like the circus. They really don't want to be there, but they're getting a lot of money for it, and it's their world. But there was one particular guy who was a very, very high-profile Formula One driver, and I knew a lot of his, as I said before, it was a travelling circus, so you get to know people, and you get to know the other performance coaches, etc. And where essentially, or the truth for this guy was that when he was younger, when he was karting, when he would get a good result, his parents would interact with him in a way where they would shower him with love, and they'd be happy, and the mood in the household for the next week would be great because this guy's had a great karting thing, and now I'm on my trajectory to try and get into one of the junior teams and then get picked up by a McLaren or a Mercedes or a Red Bull or a Renault and then get to Formula One. And then the contrary was also true, was when he didn't get results and he wasn't as good as wasn't reaching his potential, his parents would be the opposite. So the home environment would be one that was a bit more somber, a little bit more, there wouldn't be a hug after the race. There would be a, what happened there? Why didn't you make that pass? Or you could have defended better. And so then what happens is that they start to associate that when I do well in karting or in my sport, my parents, I get love from my parents. And kids need love from their parents. They need validation, they need love, they need affection from their parents to survive. So then when they start to see that that is the case, it starts to create this really unhealthy dynamic where, okay, well, I need to now go out and I need to go and be the best. And that's what creates this. What, in my opinion, this is what creates a lot of the time is that, you know, your Michael Jordans, your Lance Armstrongs, I need to get love from my parents. And it's interesting as well, if you look at that Last Dance documentary, he references where he was playing against his brothers. And he was referencing that he was looking for the validation of his dad. Lance Armstrong talks in his documentaries about how he was, they said to him, hey, Lance, when you were about to cross the line before you won your first world championship, what were you thinking? And he was thinking, my mum didn't raise me to be a loser. Something to that effect. So it's, for me, a lot of the time, this absolute need to win at all costs, for me personally, in my experience and from what I've read, has come from that a deep down place of needing validation from parents and also to a lesser extent from the people around you.
And now we live in a social media age where there's tangible likes, numbers, clicks, etc. And how do you see that impacting things where maybe you're a sports person and you're on 50,000 Instagram followers and then you perform well and it goes to 200,000 and every post is now getting 13,000 likes and you know that number because you see it on your phone.
Yeah, it's huge. And again, you know, now we're, like you say, it's now it's not only that am I protecting my reputation or validating my reputation, but it's that on steroids. So now we're in a place where it's so incredibly unhealthy. And so again, you know, you've got to have this really, really clear idea of who you are within this environment. Otherwise, you can get swept up by it. And we talk a lot about, and within the athletes who I work with, and, you know, almost invariably all of them have been affected by social media comments. So you said, look, do not turn your comments off. Do not look at social media. Get it off your phone as much as you possibly can, because if some of those get through to you, they are going to affect you. And it does. Like you know, you'll see a comment and it doesn't matter who it's from and it starts to affect their psyche because someone said you're rubbish or you're here because of this or whatever it may be. So we talk a lot about the need to be able to have your ego in check, have that North Star in check. But also, one of the things that I like to say is, do you know that person who's making that comment about you? And they say, no. Okay, so, well, do you then respect their opinion? And it's a case of saying, well, if you don't know them and you don't respect their opinion, why are you taking it on board? And we have some hard rules around that. So we talk about the ability to be able to only take on the opinions of those people you respect and who know the inner workings of what you're trying to do in a game or in a race or in a sporting environment.
That's just triggered a memory from one of the episodes with Paul Salmon, and Kevin Sheedy was his coach, and he had a really bad game and got booed off. And he was just not feeling the love that day. And he was obviously a good player. And Kevin Sheedy sat him down and said, this is where I'm going to have an E in my podcast now. But he said, do they know what, you know, how hard you work? And do you know do they know you personally? So he goes, well, fuck them all. Like, and Paul Salmon said that's been his life mentality since then, because he's like, they don't know. They're not running.
Yeah, absolutely.
Behind the scenes, etc.
Absolutely.
But just touching on that for a second, on feedback, how are these high-performing business leaders, hedge fund traders, sports people within the Vitalis network and your network, etc., how do they take feedback?
A lot of the time it has to come from people who they respect. And that's where it has to start with. And a lot of the time that's what we talk a lot about, is understanding who you're taking feedback from. So, for example, some of the traders that we work with, it's also a case of understanding where they may be getting trade ideas from and where they're potentially maybe even having other people on a pedestal. So, for example, and you come from a finance background, so you'll be aware of this, but a lot of the time the traders who I talk with, it's a case of saying, okay, well, what trades have you got on at the moment? And they'll say A, B, and C, and they say, okay, well, where do they come from? And they'll say, well, I was having a chat to this guy in the kitchen at the office in London, and he gave me this trade idea, and I thought, oh, that's amazing. And this guy runs more capital than me, and he's got more history in the game than me, and he was really, I really respect his opinion. So I took it on and I did it, and I put that trade on. So sometimes it can be the respect that where these business people are getting from. It has to understand that, well, why do you respect that person? Is it on a pedestal? And where are you really taking your feedback from?
And Stuart, I'm curious around the former player that becomes a coach versus the coach that didn't play at the highest level, and any sort of thoughts and reasonings around that, and any pushback some athletes or players have got in the past to say, maybe, actually, you haven't played the game. Why are you telling me how to bowl and you haven't got 300 wickets? Do you get any of that?
Sometimes, but I think in a team sporting environment, they're actually getting more feedback from their specific coach as opposed to the head coach. And where some of the problems can come through is where there's mixed messages. So there's messages that are coming from, say, let's talk at rugby union. So from a backs coach is different to what the head coach might be saying. So then they lack clarity, and that lack of clarity then leads to confusion, which then leads to not being able to execute or back yourself on the field. But also what I see within that environment, within people who haven't, let's call it, played at the highest level, is that if they see that the coach is making them better, they'll respect them. So there's often a massive difference between a coach who can say, well, we started 3 years ago and look at the things that you've added to your game. Look at what we've done through a very structured process to be able to say, we've taken you from here to here and we've now added these strings to your bow and we can see why you're better now. And that's where the respect will often come from there. And, the respect also comes from, and this is some of the fascinating conversations I've had, is where they really believe that the coach genuinely cares about them. That's like one of the absolute non-negotiables. So it's like the coach got in contact with me and he's invited me over for dinner, and we do that once every 6 weeks. And I know that he's doing it just to keep it to keep a relationship and to keep a rapport, and he cares about me and he cares about my family and etc. And that's, so if you get that and he makes me better, then it's all that almost blocks out any other noise around whether that coach actually played at the highest level or not.
And what about getting too close to someone, becoming too much of a friend for them to maybe then have to put them in line or tell them something that's hard? How do you go with that?
For me personally, with the guys who I'm working with?
Or even a coach.
Yeah. The way I've always worked is I've always loved to try and get the most out of people. And a lot of my philosophy is around trying to make these people as bulletproof as possible. So we're trying to get to a stage where nothing bothers you in life as much as we possibly can. Like that becomes one of the things that we're moving towards. So if a crowd boos you or this happens or other things happen, you've got the ability to be, let's call it, have a high level of resilience. And from that comes honest conversations. So it comes really, really honest conversations. And I talk a lot about with the individuals who I work with within my work in Vitalis about the importance of not being a victim. So not having a victim mindset per se. And to do that, we do have these honest conversations, and most people respond really well to them. Like I'm not yelling or screaming, but I'm challenging them in ways that I'm trying to make them better and to be able to have more levels of resilience and better headspace, etc. So as I said, a lot of the conversations become very honest and very direct, and from that point, that's where a lot of the answers come from, the truth comes from. So for me personally, it's a part of my job in the way that I see that I'm working with people.
We're going to have multiple conversations around different aspects of this moving forward in the future, but I'm just going to touch on and probably finish on, you mentioned the word resilience there, and how, and also to move on and be in the moment now. That's obviously, things don't go your way, you move on, you're building resilience. I'm curious around what your thoughts on that word, whether it is important, how it's built, and whether it does make an impact.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge part, and I think it plays a massive role in society now for everyone. And this is why, and this talks to why we started Vitalis, was because a lot of these learnings that we're seeing in high performance sport and CEOs and with C-suite executives and traders and with business people and the like, is that they're applicable to everyone in life. And I like to think of it along the lines of, if you're walking along the street and you kick your toe, is that you don't break down as a result of that. Is that you've got this ability to keep moving forward. And the way that you keep moving forward is through various different strategies. And a lot of them are based around mental clarity and performance psychology. But it's that ability to be able to go, well, you know, previously you would have got really upset at kicking your toe and you would have maybe had a tantrum, or, you know, particularly if you're a kid or whatever it may be. But now that's not going to break you. What's the next thing? Okay, the next thing is now, if you're a kid, as an example, well, you're going to start walking to school now. And it's going to be a 1 kilometre walk. I'm going to take you back, but we're going to walk to school. And then the next one is now you're walking to school with your bag. And we slowly start to build that resilience through that and start to look at how you know that there's going to be things in your life that are going to be tough, so to speak. But we've got to create this ability for you to be able to know that you can handle them, that your mindsets are on point, your self-awareness is on point, and you've developed this resilience through your life and through the activities that you participate in to be able to get that resilience.
Just going to one final question on that. We've got a lot of cricket being played at the moment, got the winter sports coming through as well. As a teenager that's growing up and they go out to bat tomorrow. Beautiful day, beautiful conditions, perfect cricket conditions, and they get bowled first ball. What do you tell them?
The game you're playing is incredibly tough from that perspective. And cricket in particular, as a batter, is very, very difficult because you get one chance. If you're a golfer and you shank it off the first tee, that's okay. You've got another 18 holes in front of you and you've got another 4 to 5 shots every hole. If you're a tennis player and you don't hit your first serve, that's also okay because you've got another serve and then you've got many, many, many different points that are ahead of you. But if you're a cricketer, you have to understand, or as a batter, is that if you're walking out to bat, that, hey, we accept that this is part of the game. You get one chance and that is it. So there's an acceptance around that, and there's that acceptance allows you then to be able to walk out and go, okay, now, am I really, really scared of failure around this? Failure in inverted commas? Because I'm going to get out at some point. Now, whether that's first ball, whether it's the 100th ball or 200th ball, I'm going to get out. So that acceptance, obviously, then, for them walking out to bat, helps them to be able to go, yeah, okay, look, I'm going to go and express myself now.
That's some great advice. Stuart Smith, we're going to leave it there for today's episode, which is a very high level, covered a lot of topics. We've gone for 40 minutes. It's great. I think there's a whole lot more to unpack here in different areas of high performance. I look forward to those chats. But thank you so much for coming in and having a chat today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chris.